Fantastic. So today we have Douglas Ferguson, who is the founder of Voltage Control. Douglas, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to open it up to start our conversation. So today's presentation is going to be a little different. It's actually a fireside conversation, so um, it'll be more conversational and we hope you will get a lot out of it. Perfect. My screen is no longer sharing. So, Douglas, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about voltage control?
Yeah, happy to. Voltage Control is a facilitation academy. We help people become facilitative leaders uh, through certifications and corporate trainings, coaching, mentoring, and we get a very active community of facilitators that bring together folks from L&D, um, of course, Agile Scrum practitioners, as well as product managers, chiefs of staff, anyone who is a boundary spanner, which we can get into some of these ideas as we chat, but facilitation shows up in a lot of roles, not just people that have quote unquote facilitator in their title or consider themselves a big F facilitator. In fact, before that we started here, you were telling me that we had to end on time because you have to run to a retrospective. Well, the retrospective is a highly facilitated conversation,
Yeah.
and there are lots of tools to bring into those moments. And so any experienced Scrum Master knows that facilitation is an active part of the job. And so excited to chat about that, and um, hope to maybe inspire some new thoughts and new activities for y'all.
Thank you. And Douglas, I know today we're chatting a lot about facilitation. Just to kind of start off with everyone on the same page, when you think about facilitation, like how would you define it? What is facilitation to you?
Yeah. Well, I kind of hinted at this a moment ago, right? I mentioned boundary spanners, and um, that's an organizational development term for folks that exist in the edges. If you think about the departments and functions within the organization being the gears, then these boundary spanners are kind of the grease between the gears, right? They're helping multiple functions, multiple groups, multiple departments work better together and be more collaborative. And inside of organizations, that's really what facilitation's about. If you go back to its Latin root, facilitations, Latin root is facili, and it means to make easy. And so facilitators' jobs are to make things easier. We don't necessarily make it easy because a lot of times what we're working on is very complex, and we can't make complex things simple. We humans often try to do that by abstracting, and it usually blows up. And so if we acknowledge the complexity and for what it is, and we use tools that allow us to navigate that more effectively, we can do better work, and we can ultimately have happier teams too, because we get to a point where there's a sense of belonging, understanding, togetherness, and we typically get better outcomes.
Thank you. Um, I saw your LinkedIn post from earlier today, and you were talking about the kind of the importance of asking questions. And that
Mm.
struck me a little bit because when I think of, questions, I generally think of coaching. But
Hmm.
for you, what part does questioning play in facilitation for you?
I mean, it's really the questions are the Swiss Army knife of facilitators. I mean, it really is the most versatile tool. And quite often, people, especially new facilitators, will get really focused on the methods, and they'll learn a design thinking method, or they'll learn a liberating structures method, or they'll learn something from Luma or something from Think Wrong, and they'll get really excited about this method, and they're like, it's a really amazing tool. This 4x4 is, I love Eisenhower matrix, whatever, right? And the thing is questions are so much more versatile. If you get really good at asking good questions, wow, you can walk into a room with a shared purpose and understanding, it may be a good plan, but you can deviate from that plan when it's needed. So it really helps you. We talk about facilitation, these 5 qualities facilitation, and we can get into more of those later. But the last one is adaptability, and questions really allow you to embrace that emergent quality of facilitation and the complexity I was just talking about. Where if we're going to be more adaptive in our process, we have to ask really good questions. We have to have really sharp and clear prompts. And it's funny, we do office hours for our alumni once a week, and I had someone join this morning, and she was talking about something that she was actively trying to work on, her questioning skills, and she had just gotten the book A More Beautiful Question, which is a fantastic book. I was proud of her for having it and bringing it, and so we spent a lot of time talking about questions, and um, similar to, I mean, a coach and a facilitator are fairly similar in a lot of ways, right? And so it's pretty keen for you to say, well, that sounds similar to coaching, because if you think about a really great facilitator is essentially coaching the team, but maybe not in a, like, you've hired me to be your coach. It's just I'm here in that capacity to help move things forward. And I mean, it's so much more powerful to bring a question rather than bring an answer, because it's exhausting to have all the answers. And if you're the kind of individual to bring all the answers all the time, then you typically alienate people, right? Like no one wants to have someone come in and solve all the problems and be told what to do. A big part of the knowledge work is figuring out the answer, and people have a lot of pride in that, right? And so, as a leader, as a coach, as a facilitator, if we bring better questions, we can tap into the knowledge of the room. We call it room intelligence, right? Like how do we really empower the group's thoughts to emerge in ways that wouldn't necessarily have come to light, right? And good questions will allow us to unpack what we refer to as integrative solutions, because oftentimes people will default to, oh, we've got 3 people in the room, there's 3 different ideas, A, B, or C. We get pick A, B, or C, but we'd be better off if we would somehow integrated A, B, and C to create some option D that's neither of those options. It's also not some Frankenstein where we took half of B and half of C and smushed it together, but it's some net new thing that evolved out of our curious questions that allowed us to navigate around those different options and truly find something unique and novel. And I think that's the real power of questions and this kind of facilitative approach to leadership.
Thank you. I love that. I love what you said about that the more beautiful like bringing a more beautiful question might get you farther than coming with all the answers. I thought that was really great. Would you
Yeah, it's
catch us up?
exhausting. In fact, I can tell you from personal experience. I was actually a software developer when I first started my career back in excuse me, 1997, and I wrote software for a number of years and was pretty good at it, and got promoted into leadership, and because I was good at writing software, but no one ever told me how to be a leader, right? And I was like, well, I got to where I am by knowing all the answers. And so then, that's how I first approached leadership, was like having all the answers. And I thought I was coaching and I thought I was helping and tutoring my reports, but but I realized that the A, that's exhausting, and B, no one enjoys it, me or them. And so having to pivot and learn to, man, one of the most powerful questions is, what do you think we should do? Right? If someone comes to you saying, hey, how should we approach this thing? It's like, well, what do you think?
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. I had not realized that you started out in development.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
And then you would add
so
why to that, right? Why do you think that?
Yes, why is
Yeah,
good.
help me
Although
understand.
I'll say this. Um why can be why is it interesting? I think that comes from a really genuine place. The thing to watch out with why questions is it can put people in a defensive. Remember when you like wrote on the wall when you were a little kid, or like broke something, And the first reaction from an adult was, why did you do that? It's like, so it brings us back to those moments. And so I think whenever that why question is a good, whenever there's a moment where that's a good question, maybe think about reframing it into, you know, uh, what do you think, gosh, I'm on the spot here now. I'm trying to reframe this, but just think about how to maybe reword it into how might that benefit us? Because that's really what we're trying to get at, right? Is like the reasoning, or what's the reasoning behind, or what led you to that decision? And in fact, I was at a pool party um, over the summer, and I was observing this little boy who was really timid about jumping into the pool, and he'd come up to the edge, then he wouldn't jump, and then he would, and it was kind of giving the signal that he wanted someone to help him into the pool. And the adult that I noticed, instead of asked, do you know how to jump in, was the question, instead of why don't you jump in, because the why question could have put him on defensive. And I thought that question of do you know how is such a really, because like also it wouldn't serve any purpose to like explain it to them if the kid already has an understanding, right? That's like, it's sort of like adult splaining, I guess, right?
Great. Um, so you started off as a developer before you started going into more leadership roles. Will you catch us up a little bit on your pathway? How, like, what were some of the things that led you from development into taking on leadership roles, into even starting your own business with voltage control? How did your pathway
Yeah.
evolve?
Well, the leadership piece, as I mentioned earlier, was more of a, I was one of the higher performers, and so I got asked to take on leadership role, which was, in retrospect, it would have been nice to be set up with some training and some more guidance rather than just kind of figuring it out on my own. I think I was having some of these early epiphanies around, well, okay, this is what it really takes to be a leader. So that started to get me really curious. And unlike a lot of my peers in CTO positions, I got more and more, the more I spent time in leadership and the more I thought about it, I got more and more curious about the human systems. Because I felt that solving these human systems was more complex, more challenging than some of the technical challenges and decisions that we had to make. Whereas a lot of my peers, and I even ran meetups for CTOs and ran a conference here in Austin called the Austin CTO Summit for a number of years. And had a lot in common. There a lot of shared interest. But one thing that I felt was really different was I was so much more curious about like how do we scale the collaboration? How do we create sustainable environments to get the best work done and get the best outcomes? Whereas a lot of my peers were really, really more excited about the technology and about some new algorithm that from Google or whatever, and so, or some new white paper that got dropped, and they were more excited about sharing that stuff, which that stuff interested me. But I think I started to get pulled more and more into the human systems, and that led me to research more things. This was like looking at Scrum back in 99, 2000, extreme programming, pair programming, which then, I think now it's like mob programming and stuff. But then, of course, design thinking caught my radar fairly early on. I had my teams experimenting with all of these things, right? And bringing in different tools to run meetings differently and whatnot. And it wasn't until 2000 and, well, I guess it was about 2014, 2015 when I started um, experimenting with design sprints on my team, and I was getting really good results. Started a pen pal relationship with the author. Well, at the time he hadn't even written the book, but he had been sharing these blog posts, and so I was chatting with him about how we were using it and the success we were having. And then fast forward, the book comes out. My team's really excited that we were doing this thing that wound up in this book. And then uh, through another chain of unrelated events, Google Ventures ended up investing in my company, and so I got to meet Jake. We turned the pen pal relationship into in-face personal relationship, and I always joke because my team was super into the design sprints because brought it to them. It was effective. They thought it was unique and interesting. We were doing this thing, and so they were more excited about the fact that Jake would get to come and do a design sprint with us than they were that we had actually gotten funded by Google Ventures. They didn't care so much about the money, but they're like, Jake, this is awesome. So through that relationship and spending more time with Jake and the rest of the design team there at Google Ventures, I started to have an epiphany that, wow, the stuff that I was gravitating toward through leadership and helping teams work better together. I started to realize that, wow, this is an industry of its in and of itself. Like people go around and do this. I kind of knew it was a thing, but hearing their stories kind of gave me the confidence that maybe I could just go do this full time. And so I hatched a plan, started doing it, and one thing that really catapulted things is Jake and I started doing some events around the U.S. and we were actually had did in late 2019 we did Vancouver, Seattle, Vegas, and then we had plans in 2020. We already had Denver booked, and we were going to do about 5 more cities. And of course, that rug got ripped out from under us on that one. So yeah, it's so then that's the story of probably longer than you had wanted, but that's how it all happened.
No, I love that. And then just in case, just to get everyone on the same page, could you define or talk really quick about design sprints just to make sure we're
Oh yeah,
all understanding
yeah,
that?
of course, yeah. Um, the design sprint, as I mentioned, Jake Knapp created the process, wrote a book about it called Sprint: How to Solve Tough Problems in Just 5 Days. He developed it while he was at Google, and really interesting story because he was at the time working on, I think he was working on Gmail,
Mhm.
and he, Google had that 20% time, and there was especially during that point in time, they were really encouraging people to follow these little side project, these little side quests, and he and some colleagues in Europe had this vision of better video conferencing. And so they went and they were trying to do some things, and he was thinking a lot about design thinking, plus like how to his mission was like, how do I design the perfect week? Because they had tried to get started a few different times, but they were showing some progress and they had some interesting ideas, but they were having trouble kind of getting this thing out of the gate. It wasn't their full-time focus. So he's like, I need to design our time together so that we get the most out of it. And so he started to tinker around with what my format might be, right? And then he brought some stuff, and on that trip where he had come in intentionally with some different design, or he had designed the time a little differently, they saw a market difference in their outputs and what they were able to deliver, and what they were able to deliver ended up being Google Meet. So it was the very first kernel of Google Meet. And I don't know if Google Meet, I think it had a different name when it first launched. But anyway, it has evolved and iterated into what is now Google Meet. And but he not only was that a big success, but he started thinking a lot about, wow, this perfect week that I designed was really effective at helping us get progress on this project. And he's like, could this be effective for other projects? And so then he convinced his boss at Google to let him go around and do that for other Google teams. And so then his job pivoted from designing software to going in and helping teams get more out of their time together. And then Google Ventures ended up hiring him out of Google to go do this for startups in their portfolio. And so then that's when he wrote the book. And so essentially the format is a 5-day format. On day one, we map out and we understand our current state. In facilitation, you'll often see this use of kind of looking at our current state and then imagining our future state together. Because if you're going to make progress on a project, it's really important that you have an understanding of kind of where we are and where we're going, and get past metaphor and get past like, what might appear to be the same language, but we're just trying to get to clarity, right? People talk about being on the same page. This is getting very on the same like word on the same page. So we get high clarity on where we are and where we're going to go. So we end day one with that clarity. Day two, we start to look at like inspiration in the world, like where have similar things been solved. We share some of these ideas with each other, and then we switch into a mode which is really common in design thinking as well as other facilitation modalities, where we talk about thinking working alone together. So everyone sketches out their own solution to the problem, but we're all doing it together in the room. So we have dedicated time and dedicated space. We're all going to come together and do this as a group, but everyone's going to create their own version of the thing. And I think that's a really powerful concept that you can bring into everyday meetings. You don't have to do a full design sprint to take on some of these pieces of why they work, right? And so we all make individual sketches. That's the goal of day one. Day two, through some techniques of like inspiration and whatnot, and ideation. We'll start off the day, then we get the sketches, and then day three, we're gonna go through some decision making tools using some dot voting, and then and whatnot. We ultimately get down. Then we're gonna map out and storyboard, which almost feels like a wireframe of the solution. And then on day four, we spend all day making a prototype. And then, if it's software like a mobile device or a desktop application, we might do that in, well, it used to be, oh gosh, I'm even like forgetting the name now. Well, now it's all Figma. Before Figma, it was, like, man, why am I blinking? Anyway, there's a tool for kind of doing interactive prototypes. But we've even done stuff in PowerPoints. We've even set up stuff live in a space where there's an actor and you not a professional actor, but someone role playing a thing that because then on Friday what you're going to do is you're going to walk 5 different people through that experience, so you can get really rich feedback. And so in a lot of ways this is some agile principles, some design thinking principles, some lean startup principles, all the stuff rolled all together into a recipe that lets you do it all in 1 week. And you come out after those 5 interviews having some real clarity on like, hey, how did this prototype land? And usually we'll also write a series of questions about the prototype, some curiosities we might have, so that we can be on the lookout for those answers when we're demonstrating the prototype or interviewing them about the prototype. So anyway, long answer, but it's a 5-day process, highly facilitated. And I think there's a lot of inspirational pieces you can draw out with this working alone together, some of these decision-making tools. There's actually a really nice one called Note and Vote we could talk about potentially. But anyway, I'll hit the pause button there and see where choose your own adventure from there.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I love that that's like getting such a short feedback loop. After 5 days, you already have a prototype and you already have customer feedback, or not customer,
Yeah.
but you already have feedback on it.
Well, and sometimes it is customers. Sometimes it depends, like on who you recruit to be your interviewees on Friday. And yes, the feedback loop is super tight. And I've had folks, especially in large companies, we've done these for Fidelity, Dropbox, Adobe, and some of these companies have been around for a while, have larger teams, are moving a little bit slower. They'll come out of a design sprint and say, usually it would have taken us 6 months to get this much clarity and this much momentum. Now, if you're a 10-person startup, it's not going to feel that absurd and different, but it's still super valuable. And in fact, for smaller startups, I usually recommend you can decompose it. Like look at the week, and you don't necessarily have to go through them and as so mechanistically, but like what about that week? What pieces of that week are you not doing? And how can you start to bring those things into your practice?
Thank you. You mentioned earlier that something about like five, I think it was five qualities of
Yeah.
facilitation.
Yep.
Would you mind touching on those? Because I don't think I'm familiar.
Yeah, of course. So we talk about a facilitation having 5 qualities, and they are purposed, inclusive, crafted, clear, and adaptive. And I touched on adaptive a little bit earlier. I think to be a really outstanding facilitator, you have to embrace the emergent qualities of complex situations and human work. We can have a great plan, but we don't know what will transpire when we start this conversation. And so I see a lot of um, facilitators or novice facilitators, new facilitators will really hang on to their agenda too tightly. You know, an agenda is important, and it's critical scaffolding. But if you're not willing to adapt to what's emerging, then we're not really in service of the people, and that's really what we're there for, right? And so that last one's super critical, and we kind of touched on it a little bit already. Purpose is you know, it's just and it's intentionally first because we have to be really clear. Imagine that you're bringing together a team to make a decision, but you don't make it clear that we're coming together to make a decision. Or maybe we're just gathering information and we're kind of like intentionally bringing people together to generate ideas and look at the intersectionality of some of that information so that we can have a richer point of view that maybe we'll go take time afterwards to synthesize, and maybe like Susan's going to make that decision. Well, that would be important to clarify coming in, right? Because if people walk out of that meeting, it could have been great. We could have generated so many ideas. We could have been so good at it, like including all the permutations and integrating things really well. But if we walk out without making a decision, and like 80% of the group thought that we were there to make a decision, they're walking out disgruntled, right? And so being clear on that purpose will help us like design the agenda appropriately, will help us make an arc and experience. Like the purpose might be just for team building. And if we really realize that that's why we're there, let's not veil it in some other kind of vocabulary or some other stuff. Let's be really honest about it and design an agenda that really builds that connection across the individuals versus just trying to sneak it in here and there under the guise of some other thing, right? And the more clear we are about our purpose, then we can have better names for our meetings, and the names can communicate the purpose, because the purpose isn't just for you making the agenda. The purpose is also helping people know how they should show up and whether they should show up. We have a mantra at Voltage Control that all meetings are optional. And so if you don't think that it's going to improve the outcomes of your work, or you don't think that your presence will impact the direction in an important and meaningful way, then don't show up. And you shouldn't be inviting people to meetings if that's not true, right? It's this intentional inclusion, to be really clear. And this kind of moves into our next one, the inclusive piece. We don't want to this whole pursuit of inclusion at all costs creates like this meeting FOMO stuff, which is like totally ridiculous, right? Like we need less people in meetings, and so we need to clarify our purpose, and then we need to support that purpose, celebrate it, and really design to it. And then we can pick the best attendees possible. And then when we have them in there, let's make sure we're asking the right questions to include them. Let's make sure that we design it so that their input's valued. Shifting from a buy-in perspective, we're not pitching something to try to get people to support it. We're actually being really curious, and we're creating spaces where people co-develop and co-design so that they have sense of ownership over things and are really excited. I mean, imagine like saying like, imagine you're doing planning poker and you come to people and you said, all right, here are the estimates for all these things. I just need you to sign off on them. Like that is like completely not inclusive, right? But I would encourage you to think about what in my meeting practices resemble that. Like that sounds absurd because we have a ritual around poker planning, right? Planning poker and estimating. But like, what about other little interactions where we're not really truly like giving them a voice and elevating those voices. So that's where inclusion really matters. Clear is really about asking those questions making sure that the prompts are precise so that we're getting the best out of people that we can. Also helping clarify across the group. I'm sure as Scrum Masters and people who run meetings, you've been in a lot of situations where people are in violent disagreement. They're at each other's throats, but like you're like, I'm pretty sure you're all saying the same thing. So like clarifying those moments, hitting the pause button and saying, "Hey Bob, I think you're saying this. Hey Edna, I think you're saying this." And then you get these head nods, and it's like, I think those are the same things, and this is why I think those are the same things. And then, what do y'all think? And then, just seeing what transpires. Also, if people are in agreement but they're disagreeing, really important to step in and say, "Hey, you're saying, um, you're both saying the same things, but I think you might be using this language a little bit different. So I'd like to confirm." And so, just the more we can clarify, the more that teams will get better results. And then crafted is about being really intentional about how we bring people together. So we can certainly rely on things that are crafted for us. So I'm sure there's retrospective recipes that you use and rely on. But when you're running meetings that aren't as prescribed, or you want to mix it up, maybe this retrospective has a special purpose, or there's some unique thing that we want to honor. Then I should be really crafted about that, not just throw it on the agenda and say, "Hey, there's a new item that I want to cover today." But like, how can I weave this into an arc of an experience? And we talk about like these arcs and experiences having shapes. How do they start? What's the middle? What's the end? How do you open? How do you explore? How do you close? Or like, are we going through like seasons? Or what kind of like experiential arc or metaphor might be helpful to create a better experience, better design? And then and then it brings us to adaptive, which I already kind of covered. So those are kind of the key qualities that we hang a lot of our thinking and a lot of our trainings around.
Thank you. I was also wondering, again, anyone, if you have questions coming up, please drop them in the chat with the cubes.
Yeah.
We'd love to get your feedback and questions too, or raise a hand and you're welcome to come off mute. I don't need to hog all of Douglas's time, but I'm happy to hog as much of it as possible. So Douglas, I'm thinking about somebody who is, kind of new into the facilitation space. What sort of tips or tricks or books or even trainings, because I know that you all at Voltage Control do trainings, what would you do to help somebody really kind of like strengthen those facilitation muscles?
Yeah. Well, and also a big shout out to Ange, for yes, it was Google Hangouts. Thank you. I was like, I knew it was something different. I couldn't remember. Um, as far as
That's
the
why I'm here to tech host, right? To find
yes,
all those
love it.
other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually found out the Figma thing too. And now I lost this page. I think it was called
Envision.
Fig Jam.
Well, it was Envision. So FigJam
Oh, okay.
came along with so Figma um has a product called FigJam that's a lot like Miro or Mural if you're so it's like a digital whiteboard, but it's tied to Figma. So teams that design their software in Figma tend to like FigJam because it's like integrated and they can move stuff back and forth. But Envision was a product that gosh, it revolutionized software development because then we could start to do more interactive prototypes versus just because before people would design stuff in Illustrator or Photoshop, and then if you wanted, you'd have to just like meet in a room and take notes, right? And then and it wasn't interactive, but InVision was the first to where like you could click through it and it felt like you were really in a mobile app. And you could put comments right on the thing, so it just made things more iterative. Anyway, so tips on being so facilitation is sort of like riding a bike. You can read like lots of books about it. You can hear Douglas, ramble on and on about it in a fireside chat. But the only way to get good at it is by doing it, and that's one of the reasons why we run a whole network of meetups that are free called Facilitation Lab, and these are opportunities to go in and role play. So it's sort of like a mix of Toastmasters meets karaoke meets like improv class. And so we will bring people in. we'll start to understand their scenario. It's like, oh, I'm having trouble with these retrospectives when someone does this, or these behaviors are really challenging for me, or like, or I've been wanting to try a new version, but I'm kind of timid because the team's really good at doing it this way, and I just don't want to mess this up. And so we just provide a space to try those things with the captive audience. And I spent some time understanding what are the conditions, what's the scenario, and so we kind of set up this make believe world, right? We had to build this container to understand. Okay, well, okay, there's the CEO that's quick to respond, but they don't talk a lot, but they come in with it really fast, always with the first response. And then there's another individual, and she is loquacious. She talks a lot, and she covers all the ground, but it doesn't really leave a lot of room for others. And then everyone else is a little bit, they share a few little things, but they're not really, no one's really pushing out into really novel and innovative ideas. And we're trying to, as a facilitator, I'm trying to figure out ways to push them into novel ideas. And so understanding those pieces, and then we'll do a role play, and then we debrief. Now, that is what we have going. And we do these, we have about 25 regions across the US where they happen in person. And then we do them every other week, if not more, because sometimes our regional leads want to do virtuals. So it could be as many as often as once a week, where we do it virtually. And so, but that I would refer to that whole approach as not only role play, but more broadly, it's a community of practice. We're coming together, we're practicing, we're sharing insights, we're reflecting, and we're learning in a richer way than we could if we were just alone reading a book, or just going and doing it with our team. So it's free to join and our community and try these things. So I totally invite people over. I'll also say that you can also create your own little community of practice within your organization. So if there are other Scrum Masters, other people running these types of meetings, or maybe you have a peer, you all have this group. You could actually like chat with folks and say, hey, like I just ask questions about the types of meetings that you're facilitating, and share interest, share data around what's worked, what hasn't worked, and also just like you're doing a retrospective on your sprint, do a retrospective on your meetings. So go back, ask people what they thought. It gets a little meta if you're retro and you're retro, but like you could ask the team, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate that retro? Like what ideas do you, what feedback could you give me? And you could certainly do that one-on-one, because people might be more constructive and might have more tips for you. And it could be a great way to show vulnerability and to build connection with your team too. If you're basically communicating that you're here to make their lives better, and so listening in that way is really helpful. So anyway, I can't encourage enough to just get out there, practice, try things, check things out. We have a ton of resources in our community. It's we call it the Facilitation Lab Hub. It's in software called Circle, if you're familiar with it. It's just basically a community platform, but we've got gobs and gobs of templates and like recipes for meetings and activities you can do in meetings. So yeah, it's super fun. And I would just say another way to get great is just find an activity or something you haven't done before and just give it a spin, because trying new things pushes you in new ways, and you might start to realize that, oh, I don't know if I'd ever do that activity again, but gosh, it gave me inspiration of how to influence this other thing that I do a lot. And you start to create these kind of peanut butter and jelly kind of sandwiches, versus like, oh, everything's just like this peanut butter all the time. It's like, oh, I can combine these in ways that make them better than they are individually.
And I know that I have two links for you. One is for voltage control and its facilitation certification. And then I have voltage control blog. Would it be either of those, or is it a separate link altogether?
Excuse me, man. I've been having trouble kicking this call. Yeah, it is a different link, and
Okay.
I'll just drop that in the chats.
Thank you.
This link is going to redirect you, but this will be because it sends you to a little application to join. There is a little application that's just so that we can collect information, because a big part of the community is connecting with others and getting to know people, that where there might be collaboration opportunities or opportunities to get to know people. And so that's why we have people fill out the application, so that out of the gate, your profile will be rich and full of information. And so, so don't let that deter you. We're not going to be like, oh, who is this person? They don't know about enough about facilitation. Um, yeah, we'll welcome everybody.
Thank you. Again, anybody feel free to jump in if you have other questions. I know that we've talked about facilitating with a team. Um, we also mentioned a little bit facilitating with stakeholders. When you think about those two kind of different groups,
Mm.
do you use the same kind of tool bag going in, or are there things that you would think about differently with stakeholders versus like your core team?
Well, I don't know if there's like a fast and true rule there for stakeholders versus the team. I would say that it's important to think of the individuals, and what are the qualities or psychographics of them? What do they value? And really being clear about that purpose. One thing to note on the people side is often we'll set up pop-up rules. Some people call them agreements. Um, there's lots of different terms for these things, but if there are ways that we need to behave or be together, or things we need to expect of people, like if we're in a brainstorming session, maybe we need to remind people that we're going to reserve judgment, like quantity over quality kind of thing. Whatever these things we might want to, these tenets or principles that we want to remind people of before we get started, really powerful. And you, instead of just like using the same ones every time, think about who's going to be in the room. Think about the purpose you identified, and that'll allow you to pick the ones that then are going to generate the best outcomes. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to predict something that might happen that might prevent us from getting the outcomes we want, or it might just make your job harder, right? Because, or it might something. Is there a moment of conflict that could happen because of two people? Then like let's seed this thing, and so we're already priming people with that, so they don't even go there, and we're kind of hitting it off at the pass. And if we do start to see hints of that behavior before it gets out of control, we can just point back to our agreements. Just want to remind everybody that we agreed we were going to be hard on ideas, soft on people, or whatever it is, right? But just calling out that, like, just want to remind people. Then it's like you don't have to call anyone out individually. You can do it the minute it starts to even get a little bit off into a territory we don't want. So those are some things I like to do.
Yeah. We have a question from Michelle. Michelle
Yeah.
asked, "What if you had any resources or books to help learn to ask better questions and thereby
Yeah.
have better conversations?"
Yes, there's a few. We actually have a free resource in the community called the Facilitator's Guide to Questions. You can
Okay.
download it from our website, but it's also, once you get it in the community, on our website, you had to enter an email address. It's like a gated thing, but once you create an account in the community, all the resources are just there to download. And so, six one, half dozen another, you can find it either place. There's also two books by Warren Berger. One's called The Book of Beautiful Questions, and that one has example questions, but then also talks about how to formulate a good question. And the book, A More Beautiful Question, is kind of his follow-on book. And I was just talking to someone about that in office hours this morning. It's funny because she got A More Beautiful Question thinking it was like version 2 of the Book of Beautiful Questions, and they're kind of two separate books, although there's a little bit of overlap in the Venn diagram. But I would say A More Beautiful Questions a little more theoretical. It's getting a little bit more into like, how questions can influence and impact things. And whereas the Book of Beautiful Questions, there's actually example questions and things, so it's a little bit more tactical, but still theoretical in some ways. But anyway, just know they're two separate books, both worth checking out. I think those are probably the two places to start. Um, uh, there's so many good books on questioning, but I'd probably start there.
Yeah, thank you. And Ange was able to get those into the chat. So if you look in the chat, both of those are linked in there now. Um, we have about 8 minutes. Do you have any story you would be you'd want to share about facilitation and I don't know, a surprising turn to facilitation or a time it worked really well? Any any facilitation story for us?
Yeah, let me think here. I'm gonna drop a book, and there's another book that just popped up as you were saying that she had gotten those in the chat. There's one called Verbal Judo, which is like really interesting read because it's from a uh, a police officer. He's no longer. I tried to look him up because I wanted to get him on my podcast a number of years back, but he's no longer with us. But he was a police officer, and he tells stories about. He also practiced judo, so he was talking about similarities between how using these negotiation skills and good questions is kind of a great a kind of verbal version of judo, if you will. So kind of redirecting energy, which is really interesting. He told a story. I mean, you asked for a story. I love the story out of this book, so I'm gonna go there real quick. So, and this will be my way of pitching this book. So, he was a rookie, just started on the police force, and he and the guy that he was, I don't even know what you call the person a rookie's paired with, but that older police officer he was with, and they got a domestic violence call, and they get there. I mean, it's straight up like objects being thrown across the house, both parties screaming, doors are open, and so the lead police officer just like strolls into the house, and like he follows after him, and he's like dodging. I mean, stuff's just flying through the air and stuff. And then the older police officer sits down on the couch, grabs a newspaper, kicks his feet up on the coffee table, and starts just reading the newspaper. And then like just due to the absurdity of it, the other the couple just literally like they're like literally mid swing on throwing some other thing, and they just like stop. And they're like, what like, okay, yeah, this is ridiculous, we got to stop. And so he said that moment had a profound impact on him and how he thinks about de-escalating moments, and the power of questions and the power of language, and the way we respond to things. Because if that police officer had to come in like banging on the door and yelling, it would have potentially escalated the emotions that were already high, plenty high enough. But the fact that he went in calm and just brought in absurdity. In fact, one of the best ways to one of my favorite techniques, is like, I guess it's a story of sorts, but it's kind of not a very long story. I was facilitating, and the CEO just would just like go on and on and on and on and on and on. And I could tell the team was really annoyed by it, right? And but they were really passionate about the work. They really liked him as a person, but in these moments, it was just frustrating for them to be like, man, I really wish like we could move on and not have, just move on. And so I was trying some different techniques and things. And so then I thought, what if I just made it really uncomfortable for him? Kind of in the spirit of this, like sitting on the couch with the newspaper. So then I just started getting the habit of anytime he was like going on a little bit too long, I just kind of get into his personal space. So like I just kind of get like where maybe my m- my leg was almost touching his elbow kind of thing. It's like just get cozy up a little close, and it's like, wow, that the spidey sense is going off. It's like he's standing kind of close to me. Maybe it's hard not to notice when someone kind of gets up into your little personal space bubble, and it was highly effective. And then it was funny because after the fact, we we were doing a post-mortem on the session, and he brought it up. He's like, I noticed what you were doing, and I got to say it was pretty effective. So, like, I think maybe the moral of that story is be creative, be willing to try things that might psychologically get us the results we want. But for the most important thing when we're dealing with personalities and behaviors is because I all the time get people asking me, how do I deal with difficult people? And I say, well, the first thing you need to do is you need to stop labeling them negatively as a difficult person, because probably what you're doing is you're recognizing behaviors that are not conducive to what you're trying to accomplish. And then as soon as you then take that and translate it into, oh, they're a difficult person, now you've already put them in a box that's going to be really hard to get them out of. And that's all in your head. And so instead, if you start to label the behaviors and say, what can I do? What might I be doing to create the behaviors that I don't like? And then what could I do to prevent the behaviors in the future? And I would say a lot of times it's people struggling with some prompt. There's a lack of clarity that will sometimes drive these behaviors. They don't understand why they're being asked to do something. So if we can clarify our purpose, clarify things for people, we'll tend to get better behaviors by and large. There's always exceptions to the rule. So anyway, that's my long answer. And
Yeah, thank you. And we're coming right up to the end of the hour. If anybody has a quick 1-minute question, feel free to drop it in the chat. Otherwise, I just really wanted to thank you, Douglas, for coming and sharing with us. It was really interesting, and I want to hear. I don't know. There's just so many new ideas today that I want to go explore. So I really appreciate
yes.
you taking the time. But I'm really excited to check out your I don't know quite what you called it, but like the putting it into practice that you all have, the role play. I think that sounds
Facilitation
really
lab. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We really enjoyed having you. And Ange already dropped it in the chat, but we do have, again, a couple more meetups coming up before we get to our slower holiday period.
Mhm.
And while things are slow during the holiday period, check out Smo2 Shorts for some of the best highlights of past meetups. So thank you, Douglas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yep.
everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.